I'm Eleanor Wilson, 68 years old, and Alaska has been my home for 45 beautiful years. My husband Frank and I built everything together until cancer took him last month. I never imagined that the day after his funeral, my son Bill would slap me across the face and tell me to get out of my own home. My daughter-in-law Catherine just stood there smirking. After decades of love and sacrifice, I found myself homeless at my age. If you're watching this, please share where you're viewing from, hit subscribe, and join me as I reveal what happened next. Trust me, Frank had the last laugh. I wasn't always an Alaskan. My story begins in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where I grew up in a modest home with parents who valued education above all else. Winter was in my blood from the beginning, but nothing could have prepared me for the Alaskan frontier that would later become my home. I met Frank Wilson during my sophomore year at the University of Minnesota in 1975. He was studying petroleum engineering, and I was pursuing education. We literally bumped into each other at the library. I dropped my stack of books, and he helped me pick them up. It sounds like a scene from a romantic movie, but that's exactly how it happened. Frank had this hearty laugh and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. From our first date at a local diner, I knew he was different from other boys I'd met. We dated for 3 years, and I fell in love with his adventurous spirit and unwavering integrity. When Frank proposed, he told me about a job offer in Alaska with an oil company. Most girls might have hesitated at the thought of moving to such a remote place, but I was young and in love. The idea of building a life together in the last frontier was exhilarating. We married in June 1978. And by August we had packed everything we owned into Frank's old pickup truck and driven the Alaska Highway. A journey of over 3,000 miles. I still remember crossing into Alaska for the first time, seeing the vast wilderness stretching endlessly before us. Frank reached for my hand and said, "Welcome home, Ellie." We settled in a small town 30 miles outside Anchorage. The property Frank had purchased was nothing but 5 acres of untamed land with spectacular mountain views. For the first 6 months, we lived in a tiny trailer while Frank and some co-workers from the oil company helped build our house. I learned to hammer nails, install insulation, and even basic plumbing. Every nail, every board in that house contained our sweat and dreams. Our son William Bill was born in 1980 after a difficult 20-hour labor at the Anchorage hospital. Frank missed the birth because a blizzard had closed the roads, but he arrived an hour later with tears streaming down his face as he held his son for the first time. "This boy is going to be something special, Ellie," he whispered. If only we had known then how things would turn out. I secured a teaching position at the local elementary school when Bill turned 3. Frank and I arranged our schedules so one of us was always with him. Raising a child in Alaska came with unique challenges. The extreme cold, the months of darkness in winter, and the isolation. But it also offered extraordinary experiences like watching the northern lights dance across the sky from our front porch, summer fishing trips where the sun never set, and a tight-knit community that looked out for one another. Bill was a happy child, always curious and full of energy. Frank taught him to fish when he was just 4, and by 8 they were going on father-son camping trips. I remember how proud Frank was when Bill caught his first salmon. They came home dirty and smelling of fish, but their matching grins made my heart swell. The trouble began when Bill hit his teenage years. Perhaps it was normal adolescent rebellion, but there was an edge to it that concerned us. He became secretive and resentful of our rules. The wilderness that had once captivated him now seemed to suffocate him. He talked constantly about leaving Alaska for the real world. When Bill left for college at the University of Washington, Frank and I felt both loss and relief. We hoped distance and maturity would heal whatever rift had formed. For a while it seemed to work. Bill called regularly his freshman year, sharing stories about classes and new friends. Then in his sophomore year, the calls became less frequent. By junior year, we were lucky to hear from him once a month. That's when Catherine entered the picture. Bill brought her home for Christmas break during senior year. She was stunning, tall, blonde, and poised, but something about her felt off to me from the start. There was a calculation in her eyes when she looked around our home, as if she was appraising it. She asked pointed questions about Frank's job, our property, and our financial situation that seemed inappropriate for a first meeting. Frank noticed it too. "That girl's got dollar signs in her eyes," He told me that night after they'd gone to bed. I scolded him for being judgmental, but deep down I shared his concern. Bill and Catherine married 6 months after graduation. They settled in Anchorage, where Bill got a job at a financial firm, and Catherine worked in real estate. They were only a 30-minute drive away, but might as well have been in another country for how often we saw them. Every invitation for dinner was met with an excuse. When they did visit, Catherine would make subtle comments about our quaint and rustic home, as if we were living in primitive conditions rather than a house we had lovingly built and maintained. Frank tried harder than I did to maintain the relationship. He would drop by Bill's office with lunch or offer to help with projects around their new house. Each time he returned home a little more deflated. "He's changed, Ellie," he would say. Or maybe she changed him. I defended Bill, making excuses for his behavior. He was building his career, adjusting to married life, finding his own path. But as years passed and the distance between us grew, even I couldn't deny that the son we raised was slipping away from us, replaced by a stranger who seemed embarrassed by his origins and parents. Still, nothing prepared us for what would happen when Frank got sick. Nothing could have warned me about the cruelty that was waiting just around the corner, hiding behind the face of the child I had brought into this world and loved unconditionally for 40 years. The diagnosis came on a Tuesday in March 2 years ago. Frank had been experiencing back pain for months, but brushed it off as the result of decades of physical labor. When it became unbearable, I finally convinced him to see a doctor. I can still hear the sympathetic tone of Dr. Patterson's voice as he explained that Frank had stage 4 pancreatic cancer. It had already spread to his liver and lymph nodes. The prognosis was grim, 6 months to a year at most. Frank took the news with the same quiet strength he'd shown throughout our marriage. On the drive home, snow falling gently outside, he reached for my hand and said, "We've had a good run, haven't we, Ellie?" I couldn't answer through my tears. We decided to fight it anyway. Frank underwent an aggressive treatment plan, surgery to remove parts of his pancreas, followed by chemotherapy. The strong man I married, who could chop wood for hours without tiring, became frail almost overnight. His thick hair fell out, and his robust frame withered away. I left my teaching job to become his full-time caretaker. Our days fell into a routine of medication schedules, doctor appointments, and brief walks when Frank felt strong enough. Despite the pain, he never complained. Instead, he became reflective, often sitting by our large living room window that overlooked the mountains, writing in a journal I'd never seen before. "What are you writing?" I asked him once. "Just thoughts," he replied with a small smile. "Things I want to remember. Things I don't want to forget." Bill and Catherine visited exactly twice during the first 6 months of Frank's illness. The first visit lasted barely an hour. Catherine spent most of the time on her phone, occasionally glancing up with poorly disguised impatience. Bill seemed uncomfortable around his father's diminished state, avoiding looking directly at him. "Dad, you should consider selling this place," Bill suggested during that visit. "It's too isolated for Mom to manage alone, especially with your medical needs." Frank's response was uncharacteristically sharp. "This is our home, son. We built it together. Your mother and I will manage just fine." The second visit came only after I called Bill in tears, telling him that Frank's condition had worsened dramatically. They stayed for 45 minutes. Catherine remained in the car, claiming allergies to our old house. As Frank's medical bills mounted, our savings dwindled. We had good insurance, but the co-pays and medications not covered by our plan strained our finances. I started selling some of our possessions, my grandmother's silver, Frank's collection of vintage fishing gear, small things I thought we could live without. Frank noticed. One night, as I was helping him into bed, he gripped my hand with surprising strength. "Promise me something, Ellie," he said, his blue eyes intense despite the illness that had dulled them. "Promise me you'll stay in our home, no matter what happens. This is where we belong." "I promise," I told him, not understanding then the importance of that vow. The last weeks of Frank's life passed in a blur of hospice nurses, increased pain medication, and long nights sitting beside his bed. Bill called occasionally but always had reasons why he couldn't visit. Work was busy. Catherine wasn't feeling well. The roads were bad. Frank passed away on a clear April morning. I had been reading to him from one of his favorite Jack London novels when I noticed his breathing had changed. I set the book down and took his hand. "It's okay to go, my love," I whispered. "I'll be all right." He squeezed my hand weakly, took 3 more shallow breaths and was gone. Just like that. 45 years of marriage ended in a moment of silence as dawn broke over the mountains we both loved. I sat with him for an hour before calling the hospice nurse, then Bill. My son answered on the 4th ring. "Dad's gone," I said simply. There was a pause. "Oh, okay. We'll be there tomorrow to help with arrangements." But they weren't. I handled everything alone: the funeral home, the obituary, the service details. Bill and Catherine arrived 20 minutes late to the funeral, slipping into the back row of the small church. Catherine wore a stylish black dress that seemed more appropriate for a cocktail party than a funeral, and she checked her phone repeatedly throughout the service. Bill gave a brief, stilted eulogy that barely scratched the surface of who his father had been. He mentioned Frank's work ethic and love of fishing but said nothing about his kindness, his humor, his unwavering love for his family. It was as if he were speaking about a distant acquaintance rather than the man who had taught him to ride a bike, who had stayed up all night building a science project with him, who had loved him unconditionally. At the small reception afterward at our home, arranged and catered by my friends from church, Bill and Catherine stayed for exactly 1 hour. They spoke mainly to each other, accepting condolences from others with brief nods. I overheard Catherine telling someone they couldn't stay long because they had a thing that evening. As they were leaving, Bill gave me a perfunctory hug. "We'll come by tomorrow to talk about arrangements," he said cryptically. Before I could ask what he meant, they were gone, leaving me alone in a house that felt too empty, too quiet without Frank's presence. That night, I slept on Frank's side of the bed, my face buried in his pillow that still held his scent. I had no idea that the following day would bring a betrayal so profound that it would shake the foundation of everything I believed about family and love. The day after we laid Frank to rest was unseasonably warm for April in Alaska. Sunlight streamed through the windows of our home, casting long rectangles of light across the hardwood floors Frank had installed himself 20 years earlier. I'd barely slept, my body exhausted but my mind racing with memories and grief. I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a cup of tea gone cold, when I heard a car pull into our gravel driveway. Through the window, I saw Bill's sleek black SUV, a vehicle that cost more than Frank and I had paid for our first house. Bill and Catherine stepped out, both dressed in smart casual attire that seemed inappropriate for visiting a grieving mother. For a moment, I felt a surge of gratitude. They had come to check on me to make sure I was coping. I quickly ran a brush through my hair and dabbed at my swollen eyes before opening the door. "Bill, Catherine. Thank you for coming," I said, embracing my son. His body remained stiff, unresponsive to my touch. "Mom," he nodded, stepping past me into the house. Catherine followed, her eyes immediately roaming the living room as if seeing it for the first time. "You have some beautiful antiques here, Eleanor," she commented, running her fingers along Frank's grandfather's oak bookcase. "This piece could fetch a good price if refinished properly." I frowned at the odd statement but attributed it to Catherine's work in real estate. That was Frank's grandfather's. It's been in the family for generations. Bill cleared his throat. "Mom, we need to talk about the house. Would you like some coffee first?" I offered, grasping at normal rituals to delay whatever conversation was coming. "No need," Catherine interjected. "This won't take long." They sat on our sofa while I took Frank's armchair opposite them. The cushion still held the impression of his body. "Mom," Bill began, his voice taking on the tone he used for business matters, "we've been thinking about your situation. This house is too big for you alone. The maintenance, the isolation, the harsh winters. It's not practical." "This is my home," I replied simply. "Frank and I built it together. I have no intention of leaving." Bill and Catherine exchanged a look I couldn't quite interpret. "That's the thing, Mom," Bill continued, pulling a folder from Catherine's designer handbag. "Legally speaking, this isn't just your home." He slid a document across the coffee table. With trembling hands, I picked it up and recognized it as the deed to our property. To my shock, both Frank's name and Bill's were listed as owners. "I don't understand," I whispered. "Dad put my name on the deed 15 years ago," Bill explained, his voice devoid of emotion. He thought it was a smart move for tax purposes and estate planning. Technically, I own half of this property. My mind raced back trying to remember Frank mentioning this. There had been a time when Bill was in college that Frank had met with lawyers about estate planning, but he never specifically mentioned adding Bill to our deed. Even if that's true, I said slowly, Frank intended for me to live here for the rest of my life. This was our home. Catherine leaned forward, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her knee. Eleanor, Bill and I have already spoken with a real estate agent. This property could sell for a significant amount, especially with the recent development in the area. We could split the proceeds and you could move into a nice little condo in Anchorage, closer to amenities and healthcare. The casual way she discussed selling my home of 45 years felt like a physical blow. This is not happening, I stated firmly. I'm not selling. Frank wanted me to stay here. Bill's face hardened. Mom, be reasonable. You're 68 years old. You can't maintain 5 acres and a house this size. Winter is brutal out here. What if you fall or get sick? I have neighbors. I have friends. This community has looked after each other for decades. I countered, anger beginning to replace shock. We've already scheduled an appraisal for next week, Catherine continued as if I hadn't spoken. The market is hot right now. If we list quickly, we could close before summer. I said no. My voice rose. This is my home. Frank and I built this house with our own hands. Every corner holds memories of our life together. I promised him I would stay. Bill stood up, his face flushing. Promises to dead people don't matter, Mom. What matters is being practical. Dad always said you were too sentimental, too stuck in the past. The cruel mischaracterization of Frank, who treasured our memories and traditions, felt like a desecration of his memory. Your father would never say that. He loved this house as much as I do. Dad wasn't thinking clearly at the end, Bill shot back. The cancer, the medications. He wasn't rational. Don't you dare, I warned, rising to my feet. Don't you dare diminish him that way. Catherine stood too, placing a restraining hand on Bill's arm that did nothing to calm him. Eleanor, we're trying to help you. This house is worth a lot of money. You could have a comfortable retirement instead of struggling out here alone. I don't want your help, I replied, my voice steady despite the trembling in my limbs. I want you to leave my home now. That's when it happened. Bill's face transformed, contorting with a rage I'd never seen before. His eyes, so like Frank's in color but utterly different in expression, bulged. Veins protruded on his forehead. This isn't your decision, he shouted, advancing toward me. I co-own this property. I get a say in what happens to it. Bill, Catherine cautioned, but her voice held no real concern, just a performative restraint. I stood my ground, though fear began to creep up my spine. This was my son, but in that moment he was a stranger to me. Your father would be ashamed of you, I said quietly. The words had barely left my lips when Bill's hand swung out, connecting with my cheek with a crack that seemed to echo through the house. The force knocked me back into Frank's chair. Pain bloomed across my face, but the physical hurt was nothing compared to the shock and betrayal that flooded my system. Bill loomed over me, his breathing heavy. This isn't your home anymore, get out, he spat, each word a dagger. Behind him, Catherine's lips curved into a small, satisfied smirk. My neighbor Martha, who had come to drop off a casserole, stood frozen in the doorway, having witnessed the entire scene. Her presence seemed to snap Bill out of his rage. He straightened, adjusting his shirt cuffs as if nothing unusual had happened. You have 1 week to pack your things, he said coldly. We're listing the house for sale. They left without another word, the door slamming behind them with a finality that matched the crumbling of my world. Martha rushed to my side, her face pale with shock. Eleanor, we need to call the police, she urged, gently touching my reddening cheek. But I couldn't form words. All I could think was, my son, my only child, had struck me the day after we buried his father. The betrayal was so complete, so unexpected, that it defied comprehension. That night, after Martha reluctantly left at my insistence, I packed a single suitcase. Though Bill had given me a week, I couldn't bear to spend another night in what had suddenly become hostile territory. The home that had sheltered me for nearly half a century now felt contaminated by violence and betrayal. As I closed the door behind me, I paused to look at the porch swing where Frank and I had spent countless evenings watching the sunset. "I'm sorry," I whispered, breaking my promise to stay. But I knew somehow that Frank would understand. This was no longer our home. It was just a house now, emptied of love and filled instead with greed and cruelty. The Northern Lights Motel sat just off the highway, a relic from the 1970s that had seen better days. The neon sign flickered erratically, casting an eerie blue glow through the thin curtains of room 12, my home for the foreseeable future. At $68 a night, it was the cheapest accommodation I could find within driving distance of my former home. I sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, gingerly touching my cheek where Bill had struck me. The skin was tender, beginning to bruise. Each throb of pain brought a fresh wave of disbelief. My son. My child. The baby I had nursed, the boy I had comforted after nightmares, the teenager whose heartbreaks I had soothed. He had raised his hand to me in violence. Sleep eluded me that first night. I lay awake staring at water stains on the ceiling, replaying the scene over and over. Had there been signs I missed? Could I have prevented this somehow? The questions circled like vultures, picking at the carcass of my former life. Morning brought no relief. I caught sight of myself in the bathroom mirror. A pale, hollow-eyed woman with a purpling bruise on her cheekbone. I barely recognized myself. This couldn't be Eleanor Wilson, the confident teacher who had helped shape generations of Alaskan children. This frail creature couldn't be the woman who had built a home from scratch, alongside her husband in one of the harshest environments on Earth. Yet here I was. I forced myself to eat a granola bar from the vending machine, though each bite felt like sawdust in my mouth. My appetite had vanished along with my sense of security. The simple task of showering and dressing exhausted me. Grief for Frank mingled with fresh grief for the son I thought I knew, creating a toxic cocktail that poisoned my very will to continue. I called Sarah, a fellow teacher I'd worked with for 20 years, hoping for temporary shelter. Her voice was sympathetic but hesitant. "Oh, Eleanor, we just don't have the space right now. Jenny's kids are staying with us while their house is being renovated. Maybe in a few weeks." Similar responses came from other friends. Some were traveling, others had health issues of their own, and some simply seemed uncomfortable with the situation. I didn't blame them. Elder abuse, for that's what this was, though I struggled to apply the term to my own circumstance, made people uncomfortable. It violated the natural order of things, the expectation that children would care for parents as parents had cared for children. On the third day, a thick manila envelope was slipped under my motel room door. Inside was a formal eviction notice from Winston and Associates, attorneys at law. I had 30 days to remove all personal belongings from the property at 4587 Spruce Ridge Road. Any items remaining would be considered abandoned. The cold, legal language made no acknowledgement that this property had been my home for 4.5 decades, that every inch of it contained memories of my life with Frank. A week passed in a fog of despair. I ventured out only for necessities, wearing large sunglasses to hide my fading bruise. On one such trip to the grocery store, I took a detour past my house. My heart wasn't prepared for what I saw. A large dumpster sat in the driveway, already half filled with what I recognized as our belongings. Frank's old fishing gear, our worn but beloved sofa, photo albums. I pulled over, hands shaking so badly I could barely turn off the ignition, and approached the dumpster in a daze. Rain had begun to fall, soaking the discarded remnants of our life together. I pulled out a sodden photo album, carefully opening the warped cover. Our wedding photos. Frank standing proud in his rented suit, me beaming in my simple white dress. The pages disintegrated in my hands, decades of memories literally dissolving before my eyes. Through the front window I could see Catherine directing workers who were removing our antique dining table. The one where we'd shared thousands of meals, helped Bill with homework, celebrated birthdays and Christmases. It was being carelessly manhandled out the door, likely headed for an antique dealer who would pay far less than its sentimental value. I retreated to my car before anyone noticed me, the ruined photo album clutched to my chest. Back in the motel room, I carefully separated the few photos that could be salvaged and laid them out to dry. Frank, on the day we broke ground for our house, Bill's first day of school. The three of us ice fishing on the frozen lake. Happy moments that now seem to belong to different people in a different lifetime. 2 weeks into my stay at the Northern Lights Motel, my financial situation became dire. The modest teacher's pension that had supplemented our income during Frank's illness wasn't enough to cover extended motel stays. Most of our savings had been depleted by medical bills. I had roughly $500 left in my checking account, enough for another week at the motel perhaps, and then what? The specter of homelessness loomed. At 68, I faced the prospect of living in my car or seeking space in a shelter. The humiliation and fear were overwhelming. I'd spent my life doing everything right, working hard, saving what we could, raising our child with love and values. How had it come to this? Dark thoughts crept in during the long sleepless nights. What was the point of continuing? Frank was gone. My son had betrayed me in the most profound way possible. My home, the repository of my life's memories and work, was being dismantled and sold off. The future stretched before me, empty and frightening. One particularly bleak evening, as I sat contemplating these thoughts, my hand brushed against something in my suitcase I hadn't noticed before. A small leather-bound journal, Frank's journal, the one I'd seen him writing in during his illness. I must have packed it unconsciously that night I fled our home. With trembling fingers I opened it. Frank's familiar handwriting filled the pages, still strong and clear in the earlier entries, becoming shakier as his illness progressed. I began to read, tears blurring my vision. He wrote about us, our life together, his love for Alaska, his pride in the home we'd built. He wrote about his fears for me after he was gone. And most surprisingly, he wrote about Bill and Catherine. I worry about Bill. One entry from 8 months before his death read, "There's a hardness in him now that wasn't there before. Catherine has expensive tastes and big ambitions. I've overheard them discussing investment opportunities and leveraging assets. I fear our home, our sanctuary, is viewed as nothing more than a potential cash cow to them. Ellie doesn't see it. She still sees the boy who brought home wounded birds, not the man who now rarely calls unless he wants something." Another entry, dated just weeks before his death. "Made some arrangements today while Ellie was at the grocery store. Can't be too careful. Catherine was asking about the deed again yesterday when she called. Said she was just trying to help organize our affairs. I don't trust her influence over Bill. Took precautions. The Northern Lights spot will be safe. Ellie will understand when the time comes." The Northern Lights spot? I frowned, trying to decipher Frank's cryptic reference. Then it hit me. He meant the clearing about a half-mile into the woods behind our house, where we had watched the aurora borealis together on our first night on the property. It had become our spot over the years, a private place we would escape to for quiet reflection or intimate conversations. The last entry, written in a nearly illegible scrawl, dated just 3 days before his death. No strength left to write much. Bill's coming in. Worried for Ellie. Put final papers in our special place yesterday while nurse was here. Borrowed Jeff's ATV. Nearly killed me but worth it. Hope she remembers where to look. Love of my life. Trust no one but Martha and Jeff. Especially not our son. God forgive me for writing that. I closed the journal, my mind racing. Frank had hidden something at our spot. Something he thought would help me. And he'd done it without telling me, knowing that Bill and Catherine couldn't be trusted. Even in his weakened state, he had been thinking of me, protecting me. For the first time since the slap that had shattered my world, I felt a flicker of hope. Frank, my Frank, had left me a lifeline. I just had to be brave enough to reach for it. The next morning, I woke with a sense of purpose that had been absent since Frank's death. The mystery of what he had hidden at our spot consumed my thoughts. Whatever it was, Frank had considered it important enough to expend his precious remaining energy to conceal it there, away from Bill and Catherine's prying eyes. I knew I had to return to the property, but the thought of being caught by Bill or the workers he'd hired to clear out the house filled me with dread. I needed a plan. Martha had been my closest neighbor for 30 years. Her late husband Jeff had been Frank's fishing buddy. If Frank's journal mentioned trusting them, they were my best hope. I called Martha from the motel phone. "Eleanor, I've been so worried," Martha exclaimed. "Where are you? What happened after I left that night?" I gave her a brief explanation of my current situation and Frank's journal entries. I need to get to the clearing behind the house, I concluded. Frank hid something there, something he thought would help me. Bill and that wife of his have been there every day, Martha informed me grimly. Supervising the cleanout, meeting with realtors. But they usually leave around 6. Jeff's old truck is still in our garage. I could pick you up tonight, and we could use the back logging road that runs along the property line. Relief washed over me. Martha, I can't thank you enough. Don't thank me yet, she replied. What Bill did to you? It's unforgivable. Jeff would have knocked that boy flat if he were still with us. The least I can do is help you find whatever Frank left for you. That evening, Martha picked me up in Jeff's mud-splattered pickup truck. The familiar scent of leather, fish bait, and pipe tobacco brought tears to my eyes. It smelled so much like the trucks Frank used to drive. We took the old logging road that skirted the eastern edge of what had been my property. It was barely more than a dirt track now, overgrown and rutted, but Martha navigated it with the confidence of someone who had traveled it many times before. Jeff and Frank used this as their secret route to that fishing hole on Miller's Creek, she explained. Said the fish tasted sweeter when they were caught on borrowed time, from chores I'd given them. The shared memory of our husband's friendship warmed me despite the evening chill. We parked about a quarter-mile from the clearing, concealing the truck behind a stand of spruce trees. The rest of the journey would be on foot. The woods were awakening with nocturnal life as we made our way carefully through the underbrush. An owl hooted somewhere above us. Small creatures rustled in the fallen leaves. In the distance, I could see lights from what had been my home. Now an alien, hostile place. The clearing should be just ahead, I whispered, though there was no need for silence this far from the house. The small meadow where Frank and I had spent countless evenings watching the sky looked unchanged. Surrounded by towering pines, it formed a natural amphitheater open to the heavens. How many times had we laid a blanket here, holding each other as the northern lights danced above us? How many whispered dreams and promises had been exchanged on this very ground? Frank said he put something in our special place, I murmured, scanning the clearing. But where exactly? Martha pointed to the far side of the meadow. There's an old shed over there, isn't there? Frank and Jeff built it years ago as a shelter during their hunting trips. She was right. The small wooden structure, weathered to a silvery gray, was barely visible among the trees at the edge of the clearing. Frank and Jeff had constructed it one summer when Bill was still in elementary school, a simple one-room affair with a wood stove and bunks. We had used it less frequently in recent years, but Frank had always maintained it, replacing shingles and checking for animal damage each spring. The door creaked as I pushed it open. The interior smelled of wood smoke and pine. A comforting, familiar scent that brought Frank's presence close again. Martha shone her flashlight around the space. Everything looked untouched. The rough wooden table, the 2 bunks built into the wall, the small wood stove in the corner. Where would he hide something in here? Martha wondered aloud. I closed my eyes, trying to think like Frank. He was methodical, practical. He wouldn't have chosen an obvious hiding place, but he would have wanted it to be findable by me specifically. What would have meaning to us alone? My eyes snapped open. The first place we saw the northern lights, I said with certainty. That's what he meant in his journal. I moved to the north-facing wall of the shed, where Frank had installed a small window specifically positioned to view the aurora borealis from inside during winter storms. Below the window was a bench built into the wall. Help me move this, I asked Martha. Together we pulled the bench away from the wall. There, in the floorboards beneath where the bench had stood, I noticed a subtle difference in the wood. One board was newer than the others, less weathered. There, I pointed. That board has been replaced recently. Martha handed me a hammer from the small tool kit that still hung on the wall. With trembling hands, I worked the claw end under the edge of the board. It came up easily, too easily for a structural element. Frank had intended it to be removable. Beneath the board was a cavity containing a waterproof lockbox, the kind used to protect important documents from fire. My heart pounding, I lifted it out. Do you know the combination? Martha asked, shining her light on the small dial. I did. Without hesitation, I turned the dial to our wedding date, June 15, 78. The lock clicked open. Inside, neatly organized, were several items: a thick envelope of legal documents, a smaller envelope bulging with what looked like cash, and a letter addressed to me in Frank's handwriting. I opened the legal documents first. They were property deeds and titles for a small cabin and 10 acres of land near Talkeetna, about 100 miles north of Anchorage. According to the paperwork, Frank had purchased the property 5 years earlier, putting it solely in my name. There was also a set of keys labeled Talkeetna Cabin, and a hand-drawn map showing its location. The second envelope contained $50,000 in cash. Far more money than I knew we had. Frank must have been saving it in secret for years, a dollar here, a few dollars there, creating an emergency fund I never knew existed. With shaking hands, I opened his letter last. My dearest Ellie, if you're reading this, I'm gone and things have probably gone badly with Bill. I've seen the way he and Catherine look at our home. Not as the place where they grew up or where their family history resides, but as an asset to be liquidated. I've overheard their phone conversations when they thought I was sleeping. They've been planning this for years. I wish I could have protected you from this pain. I wish our son had grown into the man we raised him to be. But I could at least prepare for the worst. The cabin is nothing fancy. Just 2 rooms and a loft. But it's on a beautiful piece of land with a stream running through it. I've been fixing it up on those fishing trips with Jeff these past few years. It needs work, but it's solid. Most importantly, Bill knows nothing about it. It's yours alone. The cash should help you get settled. I've been squirreling it away since Bill married Catherine, and I first sensed something wasn't right. Call it an old man's paranoia if you want, but I've lived long enough to recognize greed when I see it. I've also left copies of all our financial records, and some documentation of questionable transactions I discovered Bill making at his firm. I never confronted him. I kept hoping he would come back to us, to the values we taught him. But if he's forced your hand by trying to take your home, don't hesitate to use this information. It's not vengeance, Ellie. It's justice. Remember our first night on our land? How we laid in this very clearing and watched the sky dance with colors we'd never seen before. You said it felt like the universe was welcoming us home. You were right. Alaska became our home. And now, this new place can be your sanctuary. I've loved you since that day in the university library, and I'll love you long after my body gives out. You are the strongest person I've ever known, Eleanor Wilson. You will survive this betrayal. You will thrive again. All my love, always. Frank. Tears streamed down my face as I finished reading. Even from beyond the grave, Frank was taking care of me, protecting me from a threat he had recognized long before I was willing to see it. Oh, Eleanor, Martha whispered, having read over my shoulder. Frank knew. He prepared. I clutched the letter to my chest, feeling a strange mixture of grief and profound gratitude. He always did think 3 steps ahead. I said through my tears. I just never thought he'd need to outmaneuver our own son. We carefully replaced the floorboard and moved the bench back into position. With the lockbox tucked securely under my arm, we made our way back through the darkened woods to Jeff's truck. The next morning, I contacted Patricia Reynolds, a lawyer friend who had retired around the same time I had left teaching. I spread Frank's documents across her dining room table, explaining everything that had happened. Patricia listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly grave. When I finished, she adjusted her glasses and examined the documents more closely. Frank was smart, she said finally. This cabin property is ironclad, solely in your name, purchased with documented funds from his separate inheritance from his father. Bill has no claim to it whatsoever. And the house? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Patricia sighed. That's more complicated. Yes, Bill's name is on the deed along with Frank's, but there are strong arguments for your right to remain there: your age, the duration of your residence, your contributions to the property, the clear intent for it to be your permanent home. The fact that Bill physically assaulted you adds another dimension. We could fight this. I considered her words carefully, thinking about the battle that would entail, the legal fees, the emotional toll, the public airing of our family's dysfunction. I thought about the house that held 45 years of memories, now tainted by violence and betrayal. No, I said finally. Let him have the house. I have something better now. A fresh start, just as Frank wanted for me. Patricia nodded, understanding in her eyes. In that case, let's focus on documenting everything. The assault, the improper eviction, the disposal of your personal property. Bill may have the house, but he's not entitled to mistreat you or destroy your belongings without consequences. For the first time since Frank's death, I felt a sense of control returning. I had options. I had resources. Most importantly, I had proof that Frank had seen this coming and had loved me enough to create an escape route. As I left Patricia's office that afternoon, I looked up at the vast Alaskan sky. The same sky Frank and I had marveled at for nearly half a century. Somewhere I was certain he was watching over me still, guiding me toward this unexpected new chapter in my life. 2 days later, I stood at the end of a rutted dirt road, staring at what would become my new home. Frank's hand-drawn map had led me unerringly to the property outside Talkeetna. The cabin sat in a small clearing surrounded by birch and spruce trees, a stream bubbling cheerfully about 50 yards behind it. My first impression was one of disappointment. The cabin was smaller than I had imagined, weathered logs showing signs of neglect, the small porch sagging slightly on one side. Through grimy windows, I could make out a sparse interior that looked nothing like the comfortable home I had shared with Frank. Well, I said aloud to myself, beggars can't be choosers. Using the key Frank had left, I unlocked the door and pushed it open. The hinges protested with a rusty screech. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight that penetrated the dirty windows. The main room contained a small wood stove, a rough wooden table with 2 chairs, and a sagging sofa that had seen better days. A kitchenette occupied one corner, with ancient appliances that probably dated back to the 1980s. A narrow doorway led to a bedroom just large enough for a double bed and dresser, and a steep ladder provided access to a loft space overhead. It was humble, bordering on primitive, but it was mine. No one could take it from me. I set down my suitcase and the lockbox, then stepped back outside to get a better feel for the property. The clearing extended about an acre around the cabin, with wildflowers beginning to bloom in the early summer sun. Beyond that, the forest stretched in all directions, the snow-capped peaks of the Alaska Range visible in the distance. The air smelled of pine and clean earth, and the only sounds were birdsong and the gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze. As I stood absorbing the peaceful surroundings, I noticed movement at the edge of the clearing. An older couple emerged from a barely visible trail through the trees. The man was tall and lean with a full white beard, while the woman was petite with silver hair pulled back in a practical braid. Both wore the practical, layered clothing of longtime Alaskans. "Hello there," the woman called, waving. "You must be Eleanor." Surprised, I waved back cautiously. "Yes, I am. How did you know?" They approached, both smiling warmly. "Frank told us you might be coming someday," the man explained, extending his hand. "I'm Harold Jacobson, and this is my wife Judy. Our place is about a quarter mile through those trees." "Frank told you about me?" I asked, confused. Frank had never mentioned neighbors at the cabin property. Judy nodded, her kind eyes crinkling at the corners. "Oh my, yes. Frank talked about you all the time when he was up here working on the cabin. Showed us pictures too. Said you were the love of his life." "Working on the cabin?" I repeated, still trying to process this new information. Harold gestured toward the structure behind me. "Sure thing. He'd come up every few months over the past 5 years. Said he was preparing a surprise for you. We helped when we could, brought over meals, lent him tools. He was a fine man, your Frank." "You knew him well then?" I asked, emotion tightening my throat. "Well enough," Harold replied. "He kept to himself mostly, but we'd share a coffee now and then. He was always working on something for the cabin, fixing the roof, replacing windows, building furniture for the loft. Said he wanted it to be perfect for when you came." I turned to look at the cabin with new eyes. This wasn't just a backup plan Frank had thrown together in desperation. This was a labor of love he had been working on for years, creating a place for us, for me should we ever need it. "He never brought your son up here though," Judy added, her voice dropping slightly. "Said some things were better kept separate. We didn't ask questions." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. "Well," Harold said, clearly sensing my emotion, We just wanted to welcome you and let you know we're right nearby if you need anything. The cabin's been empty since Frank's last visit about 8 months ago, so it'll need some attention. Thank you, I managed. I appreciate knowing I have neighbors. More than neighbors, Judy corrected gently. Friends. Anyone Frank Wilson called family is family to us too. After they left, promising to return the next day with some basic supplies, I sat on the porch steps and allowed myself to cry. Not from grief or fear this time, but from a profound sense of gratitude. Even in preparing this escape route, Frank had thought to build community for me, to ensure I wouldn't be truly alone. The next few weeks passed in a blur of hard work. I cleaned the cabin from top to bottom, discovering Frank's touches everywhere: the hand-carved moose on the mantel that matched the one we had in our Anchorage home, the quilt in the loft that was pieced together from his old flannel shirts, the fishing gear carefully stored in the small shed behind the cabin. Judy and Harold proved invaluable, introducing me to other neighbors in the scattered community, helping me understand the quirks of the cabin systems, and sharing the bounty from their vegetable garden. Through them, I learned that Frank had been quite specific about his visits to the property. He always came alone, Harold told me one evening as we sat on my newly repaired porch. Said his son was busy with his own life in the city. Had the impression there was some tension there, though Frank never said as much outright. Frank was a private man, I acknowledged, not ready to share the full truth of Bill's betrayal. Harold nodded. One thing's for sure. He loved you something fierce, Eleanor. Every improvement to this place was with you in mind. Ellie would like more light in the kitchen, he'd say, or Ellie loves hummingbirds, so I'm putting up feeders. Each such revelation was both healing and heartbreaking, a reminder of Frank's enduring love and foresight, but also of all we had lost, all the years we might have enjoyed together in this peaceful place. Slowly, the cabin transformed under my care. I used some of Frank's emergency cash to replace the ancient refrigerator and stove. Harold helped me install proper insulation in preparation for the winter ahead. I planted a small garden with Judy's guidance, delighting in the way the rich Alaskan soil nurtured the seedlings. About a month after my arrival, I ventured into Talkeetna to familiarize myself with the town. It was a charming place, popular with tourists in summer, but maintaining a strong year-round community of resilient Alaskans. While enjoying coffee at the local bakery, I spotted a notice on the community board. Substitute teacher needed, Talkeetna Elementary. Teaching had been my passion for over 3 decades. The thought of returning to a classroom even occasionally sent a thrill through me. That afternoon, I visited the small school and introduced myself to the principal, Linda Kowalski. You taught in Anchorage for 30 years? Linda asked, reviewing the hastily compiled resume I'd presented. That's impressive. We're always short on subs, especially ones with real experience. What brings you to Talkeetna? I gave her the simplified version: retirement, widowhood, a desire for a change of scenery. She didn't need to know the ugly details. By the end of our conversation, my name was on the substitute list, and I had a tentative assignment for the following week. Returning to the classroom, even as a substitute, brought a normalcy to my life that had been missing since Frank's diagnosis. The children's energy and curiosity were the same as they had been in Anchorage. Their needs, for attention, validation, guidance, were universal. In meeting those needs, I found purpose again. As summer turned to fall, I settled into a routine. 3 or 4 days a week at the school, the remainder spent improving the cabin, exploring the surrounding wilderness, or visiting with Judy and Harold. I began to sleep through the night again. The constant knot of anxiety in my stomach gradually loosened. I heard nothing from Bill during this time, which was both a relief and a fresh wound. How could a child simply erase a parent from their life? Had the values Frank and I worked so hard to instill meant nothing? These questions haunted my quieter moments, but I tried not to dwell on them. Then in early October, Patricia Reynolds called. Eleanor, I've been doing some digging into those financial documents Frank left you, she said without preamble. There are some serious irregularities in Bill's business dealings. What kind of irregularities? I asked, not sure I wanted to know. The kind that interest the IRS, Patricia replied. Frank documented what appears to be a pattern of tax fraud going back several years. Bill has been systematically underreporting income from his investment firm, and using client funds for personal expenses. I sank into a chair, my knees suddenly weak. Are you certain? Frank was meticulous. He compiled bank statements, transfer records, even recorded conversations where Bill discussed these matters with Catherine. I don't know how he got access to all this, but the evidence is compelling. What does this mean? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Patricia's voice was grim. It means your son could face serious charges: tax evasion, fraud, possibly embezzlement. And it means you have leverage, Eleanor. Leverage for what? For justice. For compensation for the way you were treated. For accountability. I was silent for a long moment, considering the implications. Part of me, a dark, wounded part one wasn't proud of, felt a surge of vindication at the thought of Bill facing consequences for his actions. But another part, the mother who had held him as a newborn and kissed his scraped knees, recoiled at the idea of being the instrument of his downfall. What would you have me do? I asked finally. That's entirely your decision, Patricia said. We could anonymously report these findings to the IRS. We could use them as leverage in negotiations regarding your personal property that was disposed of. Or we could do nothing. Let me think about it, I requested. This isn't a decision to make lightly. That night I sat on my porch watching the first snow of the season drift down, blanketing the clearing in pristine white. The northern lights shimmered overhead, green and purple ribbons dancing across the star-filled sky. I thought of Frank, of the life we had shared, of the son we had raised together. I thought of the slap that had sent me reeling into this new existence. By morning I had made my decision. I called Patricia and gave her instructions. She would file formal complaints of elder abuse and assault against Bill with the proper authorities, using the witness statement Martha had provided. She would send a civil demand letter regarding my personal property that had been destroyed or sold without my consent. And yes, she would forward Frank's documentation of financial irregularities to the IRS. Not anonymously, but with my name attached. Are you sure? Patricia asked. This will likely destroy your relationship with Bill permanently. What relationship? I replied, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. He destroyed that himself when he raised his hand to me. This isn't about revenge, Patricia. It's about consequences. It's about truth. The wheels of justice turn slowly, but they do turn. By December, Bill was facing a formal IRS investigation and criminal charges for elder abuse. The media picked up the story. Son of renowned Alaskan oil engineer facing charges for assaulting his widowed mother and evicting her from her home of 45 years. Harold brought me the Anchorage newspaper one morning. My son's face splashed across the front page. The article detailed the allegations against him, including interviews with former neighbors who described the scene they had witnessed the day after Frank's funeral. Public opinion had turned decisively against Bill and Catherine. Their social standing in Anchorage, once so important to them, was in tatters. I felt no joy in this, only a somber satisfaction that truth had prevailed. Bill had made his choices, and now he would face the consequences, just as Frank and I had taught him when he was small. In January, Catherine filed for divorce, unwilling to tie her future to a man facing potential financial ruin and criminal charges. She moved to Seattle, according to Judy's daughter, who still lived in Anchorage. Bill was left to face the music alone. As winter settled fully over Alaska, blanketing the landscape in snow and limiting daylight to a few precious hours, I continued building my new life. The cabin was now truly my home, warm, comfortable, filled with new memories and a few treasured possessions Martha had managed to rescue from the dumpster. I had friends. I had purpose. I had peace. Frank had given me the tools to rebuild, but the strength to do so had been within me all along. In losing everything, I had discovered just how much remained. 1 year to the day after Frank's passing, I stood at his grave in the small cemetery outside Anchorage. The headstone was simple granite, just as he would have wanted. The inscription read, Frank Wilson, 1953 to 2023, beloved husband, father, builder of dreams. I had driven the 3 hours from Talkeetna that morning, my first return to the city since I had fled nearly a year before. The landscape was achingly familiar yet somehow distant, like a place visited in a dream. The mountains, the inlet, the sprawling city, all unchanged, yet all different through the lens of my experiences. "Hello, my love," I said quietly, placing a bouquet of wildflowers I'd preserved from our property against the stone. "It's been quite a year." In the silence of the cemetery, with spring attempting to break through the last remnants of winter, I told Frank everything about the cabin and how it had become a true home, about Judy and Harold and the community that had embraced me, about my return to teaching. I told him about Bill too, and the consequences that had finally caught up with him. The court case had concluded 3 months earlier. Bill had been found guilty of elder abuse and assault, receiving a suspended sentence and community service hours. The IRS investigation had resulted in substantial fines and a payment plan that would take years to fulfill. Our house had been sold, but the proceeds were being held in escrow pending resolution of the tax case. Most surprisingly, I had received a letter from Bill 2 weeks ago, the first communication since that terrible day. In careful, formal language, he had expressed regret for his actions, blaming financial pressure, Catherine's influence, and his own greed. He asked for forgiveness, for a chance to explain himself in person. I hadn't responded. The wound was still too raw, the betrayal too profound. Perhaps someday I would be ready to hear his explanations, to consider forgiveness. But not yet. Some bridges, once burned, require more than apologies to rebuild. "I think you knew Frank," I said to the silent stone. "You saw the changes in him long before I was willing to. You prepared for the worst while hoping for the best. That was always your way." A light breeze stirred the cemetery, rustling the emerging leaves on the trees that lined the pathways. In that moment I felt Frank's presence more strongly than I had since his passing. Not as a ghost or supernatural visitation, but as the enduring impact of a life well lived, a love fully given. As I drove back to Talkeetna that afternoon, I reflected on the strange journey of the past year. I had lost my husband, my son, my home, and nearly my sense of self. Yet here I was, driving toward a new home, surrounded by new friends, engaged in purposeful work. At 69, I had been forced to start over entirely, and had discovered I was more than equal to the task. The cabin came into view as I rounded the final bend in the road, its windows glowing with welcome in the late afternoon light. Judy and Harold had insisted on accompanying me to Anchorage, but had returned earlier to prepare a special dinner marking this significant anniversary. Smoke curled from the chimney, promising warmth against the lingering chill of early spring. As I parked and gathered my things, the front door opened. Judy emerged, followed by Harold and several other neighbors who had become friends over the past year. They had prepared not just dinner but a celebration of life, Frank's life, and my own continuing journey. The cabin that had once seemed small and disappointing now felt perfectly sized for this gathering of kindred spirits. The main room, expanded by Frank's careful addition of large windows overlooking the clearing, was filled with laughter and conversation. The kitchen, where I had installed open shelving and bright curtains, produced wonderful aromas as we shared a potluck feast. Later, as the party wound down and guests departed with hugs and promises of coffee visits soon, I sat with Judy and Harold on the porch. The northern lights were beginning to shimmer overhead, a celestial dance of green and purple against the darkening sky. "Frank would be proud of you, Eleanor," Harold said, his voice gruff with emotion. "Building this new life, standing up for yourself, not letting bitterness consume you." "I think about him every day," I admitted. "Sometimes I still expect to hear his footsteps, his voice calling my name." Judy patted my hand. "That never really goes away. My first husband's been gone 20 years now, and I still catch myself saving things to tell him."
Ich glänzte her, surprised.
"I didn't know you were married before Harold." She nodded. "Life rarely gives us just one chapter, Eleanor. My Robert died young, heart attack at 42. I thought my world had ended. Then 5 years later, this old coot moved in next door with his terrible guitar playing and worse cooking." She smiled affectionately at Harold. "Took me 2 years to convince her to have dinner with me," Harold chuckled. "Another year to get her to marry me. What I'm saying," Judy continued, "is that life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it. The painful chapters don't erase the beautiful ones that came before, and they don't prevent new ones from being written." Her words resonated deeply. I had been so focused on surviving, on rebuilding the practical aspects of my life, that I hadn't considered the possibility of more profound renewal. Not replacing Frank. No one could ever do that. But perhaps finding new forms of connection, new dimensions to my identity beyond widow, beyond betrayed mother. After they left, I lingered on the porch watching the aurora intensify. This display of cosmic beauty had been Frank's and my shared passion throughout our marriage. We had spent countless nights simply watching the sky together, awed by the universe's mysteries. "I'm doing okay, Frank," I whispered to the dancing lights. "You gave me the tools, but I built this new life. I'm stronger than I knew." The next morning, I awoke with a sense of closure I hadn't expected. The pilgrimage to Frank's grave, the anniversary dinner with friends, Judy's wise words. All had contributed to a subtle but significant shift. I was no longer just surviving. I was beginning to thrive. I called Patricia with instructions to respond to Bill's letter. I wasn't ready for a meeting, I told her, but she could inform him that I had received his apology and was considering it. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was an acknowledgement that the door wasn't permanently sealed. Spring advanced rapidly, transforming the Alaskan landscape from white to vibrant green. My small garden flourished under Judy's expert guidance. The school year wound down, and to my surprise, Linda Kowalski offered me a part-time position for the fall, teaching an advanced reading program 3 days a week. "The kids adore you," she said simply, "and we need your experience." I accepted without hesitation. Teaching had always been more vocation than job for me, and the opportunity to continue making a difference in children's lives filled me with purpose. By summer's end, my transformation felt complete. The cabin bore little resemblance to the neglected structure I had first encountered. Now it was a true home, filled with a mixture of salvaged treasures from my former life and new acquisitions that reflected my current reality. The property too had changed under my care. Flower beds brightened the clearing, a vegetable garden provided fresh produce, and bird feeders attracted a colorful array of visitors. More importantly, I had transformed as well. The shell-shocked widow who had arrived with a single suitcase and a broken heart had become a vital, engaged member of the community. I had friends, purpose, and peace. The grief remained, of course, grief for Frank, grief for the son I had raised and lost, but it no longer defined me. In September, I received word through Patricia that the IRS case against Bill had been settled. He had agreed to a substantial payment plan and narrowly avoided prison time. The house had sold, and after penalties and legal fees, there remained a modest sum that would be divided according to the original deed. Half to Bill, half to me as Frank's heir. I directed my portion to be donated to a foundation supporting victims of elder abuse. It felt right to transform that tainted money into something positive, something that might help others facing similar betrayals. As autumn painted the birch trees gold and crimson, I hosted a small gathering at the cabin, a celebration of my 70th birthday. Judy and Harold were there, along with Linda from the school, several other neighbors, and 2 of my fellow teachers. We ate, drank, laughed, and told stories well into the evening. As the party wound down, Harold raised his glass in a toast. "To Eleanor," he said, "who taught us all that it's never too late to begin again." The word struck me profoundly. Beginning again. That's exactly what I had done, what Frank had enabled through his foresight and love. That night, after everyone had gone, I sat on the porch wrapped in one of Frank's old sweaters against the autumn chill. The northern lights put on a spectacular display, more vibrant than any I had seen since moving to the cabin. "Thank you," I whispered to Frank, to the universe, to whatever force had given me the strength to rebuild from ashes. "Thank you for this second chance." Life is unpredictable, filled with joy and sorrow in equal measure. We cannot control what happens to us, but we can control how we respond. Betrayal by those we love most cuts deeper than any other wound, but even from such profound injury, healing is possible. I know that many of you watching have experienced your own betrayals, your own losses. I share my story not to vilify my son or garner sympathy, but to offer hope. There is life after loss. There is strength within you that you may not yet recognize. There is community waiting to embrace you, if you have the courage to reach for it. If my story has touched you in any way, please share your own experiences in the comments. Like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who might need to hear that second chances exist, that endings often contain the seeds of new beginnings. Thank you for witnessing my journey. May your own path, whatever its challenges, lead you to peace and renewal.